Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Friday, July 17th, 2026, episode 549, and we're going to talk about the free market function versus government regulation. And we're going to do it in the context of current events. So I've talked about this before over the few years that this channel has been active, but uh, seeing how it would function and resolve some of the issues that we're facing right now as a world, what might be kind of interesting, especially if you normally don't think that way. Um, so I'm talking about this primarily because the war is escalating again, and it's absolutely asinine. Uh, it hasn't worked. America has lost already. Trump has won 38 times already, and yet here we are again, escalating, um, bombing each other, which does not benefit anybody except maybe China and Russia because America becomes weaker this way, and people will become more dependent and look to Russia and China for all kinds of things moving ahead in the future. So John Mearsheimer, who is a professor at University of Chicago, said that he was surprised at the success of the Iranians. But, yeah, and I've said over the last year, probably mostly in Sunday sermons as an aside, as a passing thought, that I was not, because the evidence was there. I mean, the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, and even while they were there, people basically blew the whistle on how Americans had to cooperate with the Taliban there because they just could not, um, you know, neutralize them. They could not eradicate them, and so they had to compromise and therefore cooperate with them. Iraq is a disaster. When this whole war started, you had factions within Iraq that started to push against U.S. bases in Iraq. Technology has changed, and that was clearly evident when Trump started bombing the Houthis in Yemen. I don't know if anyone remembers that when he first took office, and they had to cry uncle. They had to give up and pretend that they won. And then there was that dust up with Iran last year with Israel, and Israel had to cry uncle as well because they had no defenses against the Iranian missile attacks. And that was before, and Iranian missiles have gotten better since then, it seemed. That's what Larry Johnson was saying. And uh, and so clearly, if you just look at the recent history, the US would not be able to do well against anybody. Uh, Especially because the technology has changed. And even though the United States has $13 billion aircraft carriers, they're defenseless against mass missile attacks. Like they just don't have enough defenses to shoot all of the incoming missiles. Plus, there are no defenses against hypersonic ballistic missiles. Also, there are not enough missiles for all of the incoming missiles. And so um, and to make matters worse, and I mentioned him before, but that MIT professor, Theodore Postel, um, basically is blowing the whistle on the success rate of all of these anti-missile missiles, that their success rate is far, far less than 10%. So to be generous would be 10%, not 90%, and is more like below 5%, which is incredibly pathetic, which basically means it can't stop anything, which means that the damage to all of the US bases, potential defense for US ground troops, there is none. And that's why I had that episode, What Iron Dome, recently. So all of the signs were there that the United States were going to lose big, and all of this was because they believed their own propaganda. Hey, we're number one, and that kind of thing. And after spending all that money, they can't admit, right, $1.5 trillion per year. That's what the U.S. military spending is up to now. It's got to be for something, so you can't admit that you lost. Otherwise, why are we spending all of this money? And that's the problem. And people haven't figured out yet that the spending of the money is the goal. It doesn't matter if you can beat anyone with all of that weaponry, high-tech, expensive weaponry. It doesn't matter. The goal is to spend as much money as possible because we're living in a credit asset bubble period of time. And once that starts deflating, the whole US economy goes by the wayside, and then we'll be in a world of hurt. And that's what I'm waiting for that to happen. Because when it does, the US has to bring everyone home. All the troops have to come home. And the state has to, the government in the United States has to have a reckoning. It's either that or they're going to try to increase the amount of control that they have over the population. And the recent vandalism against flock cameras kind of gives you an idea of how there is a active minority here in the United States that does not want and rejects that kind of surveillance. And so they would be trouble for the US government if they try to do that, which is kind of interesting. But this war that the US and Israel is prosecuting, the effect of it is not limited to just Israel and the United States, unfortunately, because it's disrupting world trade. There are a lot of resources for many countries that need to come out of the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, um, and it's all disrupted. You have the Houthis disrupting the traffic coming out of the Red Sea. You have Iran disrupting traffic coming out of the Persian Gulf. And, rightly or wrongly, the war has caused the disruption in the trade, and who is right, who is wrong, that's not for this episode. Although clearly, if you want to just go by international law, the United States and Israel are clearly in the wrong because they are the ones that initiated this war. They started the war. But not only is oil a resource that comes out of the Persian Gulf, but there's also fertilizer, hydrogen necessary for microchips, a lot of technology. And because that trade is disrupted, China is halting its rare earth mineral exports because those are needed and required to build all of the missiles that the US is burning through right now. And according to Larry Johnson and other people, the US is going to run out of ammunition quite soon, sooner than later, I hope. And to replenish all of their stocks, they need rare earths, and they're not going to have it. Plus, with the oil cutoff, you're also going to see a restriction of jet fuel. So all of the planes that the United States flies uses jet fuel, of course, and they are in competition with commercial airlines. People who want to go on vacations and travel, they have to compete with the military for that jet fuel. And where does all that jet fuel come from? From oil. And so here, so it'll be really interesting over the next couple of weeks to see how the world and the US copes with those kinds of shortages. So all of these resources are cut off from the Persian Gulf. So what do we do? I mean, do we panic? Do we say, oh no, government, please solve this problem quickly? And Trump seems to take that attitude, like, I'll save the day. I will reopen the Persian Gulf for you. And it's an utter catastrophe. It's just not happening. So if I was another country, so unfortunately, because US is taking this position, we here in the United States, we're kind of screwed. We're held hostage to our incompetent government, our Congress that has failed in their responsibility to keep the executive power in check for whatever reason. And so here we are waiting for everything to fall apart. But if I was in another country, let's just say Korea or Japan, which has to import like over 90%, if not 100% of all of its oil, What do? Do you wait for the United States to solve the problem for you? The United States, what you would do is you look for an alternate source. You look for another source. And I wouldn't care what the US demands, or even uh, if I did, I would only pretend to care. Like if the US says, no, you got to do it this way, then I would do a Trump. I would just pretend that I was going along with whatever it is he was demanding. At the same time, I would have talks with other countries to try to source oil, fertilizer, hydrogen, whatever I needed. I would try to find other sources for this stuff that my population, my economy absolutely needs. In other words, I have to serve the interests of my people, not the interests of a corrupt US government, because certainly the US government does not even represent the people in this country. Congress is silent, and Trump has gone back on all of the campaign promises that he made to us. So I would source product from somewhere else. Uh, Russia seems to be a good option, so why not Russia? And if some of you are having this kind of, oh no, you're that kind of person. The United States was buying Russian oil during the whole time of the U Ukraine crisis. And they were doing it by getting India to buy it for them. So they were getting India to buy Russian oil. India would buy the Russian oil, and the US would buy it off of India. So don't give me any of this like, oh, how dare you? Well, the US was doing it too. So come on. And if the US was doing that, then certainly I'm going to do it as well. Russia wouldn't mind, and my people wouldn't care as long as they had oil. And the rest of the production process, it's the same deal. Can I refine it here? Where can I find a refinery that will be able to do it for me? And if they don't have the facilities, their refinery doesn't have the scale that is required to handle extra load, more work, then I would help finance more refineries, help them to build more so that they can increase output, right? So while the US is cutting off the traditional sources people have been using for 50 years, well, now it becomes an opportunity for someone else to say, you know what, I can do that. And they step up and they do the job. And that's all part of sourcing the product from somewhere else. The prices will be higher. That's fine, because that incentivizes other places, other countries, other companies to start building and providing the infrastructure necessary to provide the product that other people are seeking. And you're going to do it quickly. You're going to try to do it as fast as you can. In other words, you don't wait for the United States to solve the problem, right? They've made their bed. Now they have to lie in it. And so we're going to make our bed and we're going to move it somewhere else. Now, hopefully, the governments of other countries are listening to the businessmen, to the people of their country about where to source it, how to source it, what was the best way, not which corporation is going to make the most amount of money. And so we'll give it to them because they're going to give us kickbacks. No, no, no. You don't have time for that, right? Speed is the priority. And so business people will be able to, well, certain business people will tell you who would be able to do it best and the fastest. And price, cost, well, that's something you have to deal with later. Higher prices always means that you're going to have to prioritize, be more careful, use it for what is absolutely necessary, and you have to cut back. Maybe you don't travel as much. You reduce your consumption somehow, but that's all that higher prices does. You just have to reduce the amount that you're actually using, but in the process, you're also incentivizing other people to produce it, to provide it, to transport it, and that gets the ball rolling even faster. And I've talked about it before, how a lot of governments will say, oh, you can't raise the prices. I don't want any price gouging. Well, that's the problem. Like, you take away the incentive for people to seek alternatives, to be able to take advantage of, building a factory, building a refinery, building more ships to transport all of these materials and goods. So hopefully the governments of other countries are listening and are acting on the interests of, on the behalf or the interests of their people. Now, of course, there are issues that need to be overcome. Okay. So basically, what I've said so far is a free market activity, right? Oh, so where I used to get it is no longer, they're going to charge more or they're going to stop providing it. Oh, that's fine. I'll look for it from someone else. And now the other logistical problems are the lag. There's a big lag in the building of refineries. Where are our tankers, our ocean-going tankers? Are they trapped in the Gulf? Where do we have others on standby? Where does the refining take place? Now, if you were following the news carefully, you know that this became a real possibility the moment that the United States and Israel started beating the war drums with the election of Trump. So I don't know, that's 2 years so far. And as soon as that happened, now you said, okay, well, we got to have a plan B. So hopefully there were some countries out there 2 years ago saw this coming and said, okay, we got to do something else. And if you're thinking that 2 years ago, how could anyone know? Just look at the Ukraine war, right? Ukraine used US strategy, US equipment, US logistics, and they got spanked. Okay. And so that tells you that whatever the US strategy was, how they were going to prosecute war is obsolete. It no longer works. And so that was a clear signal back in 2021 or whenever that war started that I would have, if I was in another country, dependent on the United States, I would say, okay, time to look at alternatives. So hopefully then they would have began the process of building refineries, building, extra tankers or whatever for their plan B. So this is where innovation in technology becomes extremely important, which the government cannot do, right? So it's individuals who are in the business, who are engaged in all of this trade and commerce. They're constantly trying to figure out, how can I do this better? How can I streamline this process better? And that's where innovation and innovations in technology become really important. And I'm not just talking about computer chips, because there's only so much that a computer can help when it comes to transporting hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil from one place to another. But I've talked about fast building before, right? How China, like almost 10 years ago now, can build a 50-story building in less than a month, complete with working electricity, plumbing, all this other kind of stuff. So this fast building process. Well, if you can do that with building, you can do that with bridges, then why not with boats, right? I don't think it's a big stretch of imagination to be able to see something like this fast building process with boats. Okay, maybe you can't make these super tankers yet, but sure, why not make a whole lot of smaller ones, that, eventually you'll be able to make up the capacity of a super tanker, but it allows you to transport the oil now. Sure, why not? Uh, why not employ fast building technology with pipelines, with refineries, all of this stuff? The possibilities are endless. And if you can build a 50-story, 57-story building in 19 days, which was the video I talked about before, well, you could probably do something like that with boats, with ships, with oil tankers. I don't think that this is beyond possible. And a few episodes ago, I even talked about the technology that you see in China with building canals. I mean, literal canals for ships. And I'm not talking about canals like, okay, modifying a river in your land to be able to accommodate larger, but I'm not talking about, I'm talking about navigating mountains by building ship elevators and then canals like highways, except for boats, to be able to navigate all of these mountains. I mean, they do that already. And if they can do that, then you can build a lot of this other stuff. And a lot of people say, well, Asians, they do shoddy construction. Okay, well, people in the West do it better then. But it is possible to do it quickly and safely. I firmly believe that. And so if you saw this coming at least 5 years ago, then by now you would already have all of the things in place to be able to take the load, to provide alternate sources and production, refining, transportation that you needed, and so it's not a big deal. Um, let's see. So the problem, of course, so talked about the logistical problems, talked about construction, but then the problem, of course, is that government is there every step of the way to slow down or at least make impossible this whole process. And the way they do it is through licensing, regulatory, safety guidelines, whatever. Also, the government impedes innovation by subsidizing existing delivery systems. So it's a lot harder to develop fast building ships very, very quickly if the current method of building ships is heavily subsidized by the government. And so it makes it very, very difficult and expensive to try to jumpstart an alternate way of manufacturing. And this is the problem, right? And so when something is disrupted in this way, now you're going to have lots of price shocks, not just in the cost of oil, but in the cost of building ships, for example. But this kind of price shock also then leads to the solution, which is alternatives. Alternative production methods that we already talked about, but also alternate materials. And this is where the chemists of the world, the physicists, these sciencey guys, that's where they come in to solve those problems. Alternate materials, stronger materials, lighter materials, more easier to manufacture and manipulate materials. And I know this is all possible because we see it already in other aspects of our life, which is like, for example, drug smuggling or any kind of smuggling for that matter. Um, Drug smuggling is incredibly successful, and that's with a lot of government active restriction and attempts to stop it. And I've talked about this before about with the black market. Even though the government tries to shut down the black market, that's illegal smuggling. I guess that's redundant, but anyway, they can't, and drug smugglers, still drug cartels, they still make a lot of money. And the reason is because the government is so inefficient, they can't catch drug smugglers who are always innovating constantly. And so government, interdiction is always one step, two steps behind. Uh, and people's creativity to make more money by circumventing legal restrictions is always faster than the government's ability to respond to it, which is why it's always a waste of time. Now, cartels, the scale is different because drugs are a lot smaller than super tankers of crude oil, right? But, I think that you can upscale, right? You can scale it up. It's not that difficult if you are in the business. Drug dealers, drug cartels can't necessarily scale up so much because when they do that, they become too big, and then now government can track them pretty easily. Fentanyl is another example of what happens when government tries to stop the black market. they come up with a much more stronger and compact, uh, drug. So it's a lot less in volume than cocaine, much, much less than marijuana, and much more addictive, much more powerful than any of the other two. You can see this in nuclear energy too with thorium, right? When something gets too ridiculous, then people look for alternative methods, alternative materials, and thorium is something that I've talked about before. So there's a lag, right? The more that the government interferes, the harder it is to be able to find alternatives. Also, the more government interferes, the more people are dependent on the government to solve all of their problems for them. But imagine a world where there's no government interference. So government gets out of the way. Well, then people would maximize their time and effort to always seek better trade partners, and other people would try to keep their trade partners by treating them better. Instead of threatening to bomb other people all of the time, you're going to try to entice them to continue shopping with you by making your service and your product always better, anticipating what other people are doing, trying to take away your market share by constantly trying to improve your method, your product for your customers, right? Which is a totally different mindset than what we're seeing now with the United States, with their embargoes and sanctions and war and bombing. So all of the time and energy would not be wasted on protectionism, right? People trying to get around the protectionism. People would constantly be pushing research instead. And we wouldn't have this massive debt, right? This debt is coming from the government trying to protect its empire of corporatism, of fascism, right? Oh, my corporations that I favor, the companies that I want to get even bigger so I can make more money, right? I have to protect them. And to protect them, I have to wage war. And to wage war, we got to overspend for all these obsolete weapons. And so, and that increases the debt, So we wouldn't have this debt. We wouldn't have incompetent people with monopolies, whether it's monopoly of force in the government, monopolies, corporate monopoly, cornering the market for obsolete technology. I mean, think about this AI bubble. As legit as some of it might be, it certainly does not warrant the trillions of dollars that's going into it. So, you wouldn't have as much of the problems that you see today. And so the debt in and of itself is for the benefit of the few, while the rest of us have to pay. We wouldn't have to worry about lazy, sloppy slogans from socialists, right? That's what I'm beginning to see more and more people, talking about the dangers of socialism, the resurgence of socialism. Well, if we were free, then no one would care about socialists. I mean, freedom was the natural cure, or the, what do you call it? The anti-socialist message is freedom. Why would you? Because there would be less to complain about, right? Only the lazy people are complaining because they don't want to work. And so if we listen to these lazy socialists with their lazy, sloppy scholarship, then we're only going to have even worse problems moving into the future. Now, with all of this freedom, as I said, socialism only works when you have hate, when you have violence, but hate and violence exist when you have monopoly control over things, when you have the government interfering in our lives. And so more freedom means less hate, more cooperation, which means more prosperity for more people. And this is why the socialist message will die, and will be a lot weaker, because we know that stupidity never dies, right? It's always going to reappear somewhere. So socialist message would be a lot weaker because we have such better alternative. The podcasting world itself is another example of how when corporations try to control the narrative, when governments try to control the narrative through with its propaganda, and they feed all of the information to the corporate legacy media. Well, podcasting appeared, right? And here we are. So when things start to go sideways, when this war starts to go out of control, we got to advocate for freedom. We have to lead those people who are still waiting for the government to solve all their problems. We got to lead them out of that darkness, teach them the beauties of freedom, the potential of freedom, instead of looking backwards and being resentful and hateful. Be filled with hope. Look to the future for all of the possibility uh, of uh, of resolved problems, uh, of more exciting things that we never even dreamed of and imagined. And when you realize that that is possible, then you stop looking to the past and you stop being angry, but rather you try to help others to be able to see the brighter future as well. That's it for today. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next time.